Okay, since I found out that most students that had trouble just don't know the rules for shifting, here they are. Let's start out with a base graph of y equals the square root of x. If you're ever unsure about your base graph, just plug in some numbers. Square root of 0 is 0, square root of 1 is 1, square root of 4 is 2. And so this graph has a point at 1, 1, 4, 2, 0, 0. It looks like this. Okay, so this is the graph y equals the square root of x. If I were to take y equals the square root of x and add 2, I would take every point on that graph and shift it up 2. There's my new graph, shifted up 2. If I were to take y equals the square root of x and minus 3, I would take every point on the original graph and I'd move them down 3. And so they would come out here, here, and here. So the 2 here moves it up, the 3 here moves it down. So let's start off with the same graph. Y equals the square root of x, 0, 0, 1, 1, 4, 2, square root function. And now what happens to it when you put a negative in front of it? When you put a negative in front of it, the 0 stays at 0, the 1 becomes negative, the 2 becomes negative. So a negative in front makes the graph upside down. What about when I put a 2 in front of it? A 2 in front of it makes everything twice as tall. So 0, 0, well, you can't get taller than 0 because you're at 0, but if 1 got twice as tall, it would be a 2, and if 2 got twice as tall, it would be a 4. So this graph is stretched vertically. Starting off with the same graph again, y equals the square root of x. What happens to the base graph when I put a number inside the square root, like y equals the square root of x minus 2? The square root of x minus 2, the whole graph is moved to the right, because you actually ask yourself what makes it equal to 0. So that 0, 0 gets moved to the right 2. 1, 1 gets moved to the right 2. 4, 2 gets moved to the right 2. And my new graph looks like this. And if I were to graph the square root of x plus 3, you're saying what would make it equal to 0? This would be centered at negative 3, so you move it to the left. So here's my graph, same exact graph, shifted to the left 3. So here we have y equals the square root of x, and we're going to compare it to y equals the square root of negative x. So square root of x looks like this, 0, 0, 1, 1, 4, 2. If I take the square root of negative x, I get 0, 0, negative 1, 1, negative 4, 2. So when the negative sign is inside the function, it reflects it, or you can say it flips it across the y-axis. And there's not much else really strange you can do to it. So on the next slide we'll review all of them. So for all of your basic functions, here we have y equals x squared. It's a parabola. If it's shifted plus 4, we move it up 4. If it's shifted minus 2, we move it down 2. If the x minus 3 is inside the parentheses, that moves it to the right 3. If the x plus 2 is inside the parentheses, that moves it left 2. If there's a negative in front of it, it makes it upside down. And if there was a 2 in front of it, it would make it narrower or stretched vertically. If there was a number between 0 and 1 in front of it, it would make it wider or stretched horizontally. And you have to be able to apply these rules about shifting to any function. One last example. Okay, so let's just say you had a base graph of y equals something crazy like the absolute value of x. So absolute value function is v-shaped. Let's say I did something crazy like took half of the absolute value of x minus 4, but I made this negative. That half would make it wider, and the 4 would move it to the right, and the negative would make it upside down. So you would start off with the vertex moved over to the right 4. You would make it upside down, and instead of going over 1 up 1, you'd go over 2 down 1. Okay, so we have a flip, a wider, a move to the right. Let's take another function, y equals x cubed. If you took and made a table of values for y equals x cubed, you have -1, 0, 0, and 1, 1, which makes you think it's kind of straight, except for when you pop in 2, you get 8, which is sort of way up there. Okay, so now let's look at shifting that graph. Let's say I wanted to take y equals, and I'm going to go negative x minus 1 cubed. So this is going to move the graph to the right. This negative sign right here is going to move it upside down. So I'm going to take each point on the graph, I'm moving one over to the right, and I'm going to flip them upside down. So flipping upside down is going to move this point to here, and this point to here, so the graph is going to go like this. Moved one to the right, flipped upside down. Hopefully, now you remember how to make graphs, and so you can do well on your quiz because you're like, wow, I can make the graphs.